listening to the Cricket Podcast.
I think it was a disgraceful performance, and I think it should never be permitted to happen again.
That is very good.
Right, fellas, it's IPL Auction Preview time. For this, we are joined by cricket analyst Dan Weston, whose CV includes work with the Birmingham Phoenix, Leicestershire Foxes, and a book, Strategies for Success in the IPL. He's talking a big game there. Frankly, I don't think we could have someone more qualified to talk about this than you, Dan. It's been a little while. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks for having me on. So much looking forward to the auction on Thursday as well.
Great. Basically, what we're going to do then is go through each team in the IPL in reverse order based on where they finished last year. So we'll be starting with the Rajasthan Royals. One of us will provide a short intro, talk about the positions that need to be filled and the budget, etc. And then Dan will tell us who they're going to pick up. We should also say that if we've got a few listeners, I think most of our listeners probably do follow the IPL, but if you don't, this might be a little bit confusing. So the sort of rough basics are that there's going to be a mini auction in the IPL, which is when the teams release some of their players and there's a limited player pool, and then they basically rebuild about a third of their squads each prior to the 2021 tournament. Each team needs to build a squad of 25 players with a maximum of 8 overseas players within that 25. The auction pool, that's made up of players that franchises have expressed an interest in picking up. So somebody out there wants all of the, 300 or so players on the list. Does anyone here have any questions about how we're going to do this or what the IPL auction is?
What's the IPL? What does IPL stand for?
It's yes. Let's just move on then. And we'll just get straight into it with the Royals, the wooden spoon winners from 2020. They have 8 squad positions to fill, including 3 positions for overseas players. To build the final third of their team, they have 35 crore, which works out at about 3.5 million pounds. So 1 crore is about 100 grand, and we'll probably use those roughly interchangeably on this podcast. I reckon personally that they'll be looking for some fast bowling or basically any bowling to back up Jofra Archer. But let's get you in early, Dan, as the expert. Talk us through the Royals and what they need to do to move out of last place.
Well, first of all, I definitely agree with you about the need for bowling reinforcements. Along with Kings 11, they had the worst bowling group in the comp last year, statistically. Or they're not called Kings 11 anymore, and they're called Punjab Kings as their new rebrand as well. So Rajasthan, they really need pace bowlers in particular to help Jofra Archer. Obviously, they've retained Tiabi, who has some potential, and maybe they're looking to grow into doing that. But they also need some extra reinforcements for that as well. My notes from them say they need numerous death and pace bowlers and probably at least one more quality overseas batter, because their batting stability was pretty weak last year, even though their boundary hitting was quite good. So for me, I also thought some of their retentions were a little bit questionable. I've written a lot in the past about the fact that overseas players are quite easy to jettison if in more of a high expected value world. And so there's only really need to retain overseas players if you think they're going to cost more to buy back at auction, or they have like a super rare skill set. So guys like, for example, David Miller, AJ Ty, you could, I think, release and then work out better options or pick them back up at auction without paying any more money. So I think that that didn't really make any sense to me. I think Stokes at 12.5 crore is quite overpriced, even though I can understand that rare skill set argument for him somewhat. And Nadkat was another retention that kind of surprised me a bit, because the last couple of years he hasn't performed very well. So who will I look to pick up? For me, the first name on the list would be Jai Richardson, because as a bowler who's coming towards peak age, 2 power play, 2 death bowler, why not? and his numbers are excellent. That's exactly what they need. Plus, he's a very, very useful lower order hitter, maybe like an 8 or something like that. So that gives their top order batters a little bit more of a license to attack, and then they could pick him up. And plus, by doing that, you stop Mumbai getting him, because he'll basically complete their team. So, I mean, if I'm Rajasthan, and obviously I'm not, but if I am, then I'm bidding for Jai Richardson until I get him.
So talking about a little bit further up the order, then obviously they got rid of their captain Steve Smith, which to probably the more casual IPL fan looks like a big move. I mean, Steve Smith is a Galactico in the wider cricket game. Ross, we talked a couple of weeks ago about some of the wider Rajasthan Royal strategy on this show. Who do you reckon they might pick up as an overseas batter to replace Smith?
So I think essentially it has to be top order. I think, Dan, you said they need a bit more firepower at the top. And I mean, there is a Australian and English kind of contingent, which is quite batting heavy. So you've got Malan, Hales, Roy, Livingston kind of in the English duo, or the English contingent. You've got the likes of kind of Aaron Finch, Glenn Maxwell's in there as well. I'm always reticent on this kind of stuff to kind of say that Glenn Maxwell should be the one that gets picked up, because it seems on every single team there's a Glenn Maxwell-shaped potential hole, which I'm not entirely convinced about. I mean, the guy didn't even hit a 6 at the last IPL.
No, that's not ideal, is it? Dan, Ross reeled off 6 names there. Would any of them be on your potential list for the Royals?
Yeah, definitely. So I've got a few players on my list as well for them. So Livingston, they had him before, wanted to go back and play county cricket last year, and I think he could be quite an interesting pickup. He's got a really high 6 percentage, and also offers quite a useful bowling option for me. Having a bowler who can bat in the top 6, a potential bowling option that they can use for matchups and stuff in that top 6 is so useful. And Moeen Ali obviously fits the bill in that respect as well. Excellent spin hitter, another 6 hitter as well. They could also, I think, look at Alex Hales as an opening batsman. So I think I read earlier that Rajasthan had 5 different opening combos last year. So having that more settled opening combo would be good. Personally, I think they've probably already got that. If Butler and Stokes could do the job together. I think Stokes is a better opener in T20 than he is in the middle order. He's got a much stronger record against pace than spin. So it makes sense to bat him up the top. So there's a couple of names. And also I have a little shout for a couple of other sort of lower profile names that could get picked up. Moneyball type names, opening batsmen. Ramanullah Gabaz from Afghanistan, who is a very, very talented hitter, done well in the T10, 35% boundaries in the T10, and is starting to make a name for himself in various T20 leagues. And also Finn Allen from New Zealand, who scored over 500 runs in the Super Smash this year at a strike rate of almost 200. So those are not bad numbers at all. And
a couple of hipster choices.
Very much so, but that's what I'm about. So
yeah. I think the Royals have, more broadly speaking, some structural issues that will be quite hard to paper over in a mini auction. I think that their Indian players are by a reasonable distance the worst Indian players in the tournament, and that means that the overseas players have to do too much heavy lifting. Is there anything they can do to address that, or do you think I'm wrong? We'll ask Max, and then we'll inevitably go to Dan, I think, on this one.
Yeah, well, I think it's a good point. They are a little reliant, aren't they, on actually quite a lot of English players, it would seem, and it's just because those 4 slots are so precious. It is really important to have that Indian contingent, and I think I would agree with you, Jack. Personally, I think you need a couple of Indian sort of star players to back that up, and I don't know if the Rajasthan Royals have got that enough depth in that department.
You could pick up the bejazzled Harbhajan Singh, who's put himself in at the maximum base price.
But Dan, would you be going for Harbhajan Singh?
Probably not. I think I wouldn't really look for an off spinner, a veteran off spinner myself. I just don't think that there's that much desire to have an off spinner in your team unless they bat as well, or they're a complete mystery type bowler with a lot of upside. And I'm not sure that that's something that Rajasthan would go the route that they go down. But going back to what you were saying at the start about it's difficult to restructure in these mini auctions. I think that's so true, because what we've seen is that a lot of the franchises have been very cautious about releasing Indian players back into the auction, and that's it's tempting. I think what we see a lot of the time in the last few auctions is that teams take a punt on guys from like Syed Mushtaq Ali Trophy, Tamil Nadu Premier League, Karnataka Premier League as well. And the gap in standard between IPL and those lower leagues, particularly the latter two, is huge. And really, there's only a few players in there who would even be a ballpark average standard at the IPL or a little bit better. But what we see sometimes is people taking massive punts on them because they've got recency bias and they've been tipped up and they're a bit in vogue. They end up going for like 5 or 6 crore or something like that. And to me, that's a massive mistake and a punt that's not worthwhile. So, yeah, it's hard to overhaul the domestic contingent in a mini auction. And it's kind of just like bits and pieces now in this mini auction till next year's major auction.
Could you see the Dube in play?
I don't really rate him that highly, to be honest with you. I'm not really a fan of players who aren't good enough to get in a team as a batter or a bowler, if that makes sense. I call them quite luxury players. And with Dube or Dube, I don't know how you say it, but yeah, it's
I think it's Dube. Yeah, Ross has just compared him to Dion Dublin's run.
Yeah.
Yeah, he could break into the Indian market with his instrument if he's really clever with it.
That's interesting. I think Dube might come up again, but we were speculating a while ago that we thought he could end the auction on the 18th as quite a rich man, being one of the sort of few Indian players who isn't really old.
Has experience
and has a little bit of experience in the IPL.
And does both, both batting and bowling.
Anyway,
yeah, I think he'll be popular, but I wouldn't go for him myself.
Yeah. Anyway, I think we'll draw a line under the Rajasthan Royals there, with some names for you, and move on to Chennai Super Kings.
Yeah, so Chennai had an awful IPL 20, not reaching the playoffs for the first time ever, and that's obviously disgraceful to the CSK fans they're like Man United fans about 15 years ago. MS Dhoni, it could well be his last IPL. He's about 55 now. He was pretty pants at the last IPL, and they've a bit of an interesting auction strategy or retention strategy. They've for some reason kept hold of all the old players that they have, other than Shane Watson, who retired, so took the decision out of his hand, and Harbhajan Singh decided to be like, do you know what, I'm worth way more money than this. So CSK still have 42-year-old Imran Tahir in the thing, which I don't think is that bad of a thing, but it means that they've got a bit of a difficult auction ahead of them because they've only got one overseas slot, with 22.9 crore to spend. They could have gone to the market with a bit more. Dan, originally I was kind of thinking that they might need a top order hitter in there, but with Gaikwad, Faf, Suresh coming back, so he's the second highest all-time run scorer in the IPL. I think I might not be making that up. And Rayadu, they've kind of got a 3 and 4 there, which isn't horrendous. So maybe their one overseas slot could be Shakib Al Hassan.
That's an interesting one because I actually think they really do need hitters, and particularly middle over boundary intent. The guys you mentioned there, I think you said Gaikwad, Duplessis, and who was it? The other?
Suresh Raina.
Suresh Raina, of course. So Gaikwad actually had the second lowest percentage of boundary hitting in the comp last year, and we'll talk about the player with the worst a little bit later, probably when we talk about RCB. But yeah, so Gaikwad obviously has a lot to prove from that perspective, but he's young, and you would like to think that he can improve. Duplessis is not really a hitter. And Raina is, I don't think, a hitter either. And to be honest with you, I made some notes about their retention strategy, and I think one of you alluded to earlier about the fact they could have gone to auction with a little bit more of a kitty. And I'm surprised that Raina at 11 crore, Bravo at 6.5 almost, and Khan Sharma at 5 are retained. I think that they could have really done a lot more with that overhaul that they probably did need after last year. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I would say that they needed a hitter from somewhere. Maybe they'll go local market, or maybe they'll just say, no, that's not how we play, and we're not going to pick a hitter again. and kind of be stubborn about it, and then go for more of an overhaul next year. I don't know, but yeah, they need a new spinner as well. Definitely, I think that's something that they clearly need. So again, they may go local or even overseas, but I think they retain Santner and Tahir as overseas spinners, so they probably might go local market for spinners instead.
Yeah, and they've obviously got Jadeja, who's just an unbelievable asset. Anyway, should they have got rid of that boy Chawla?
Pius Chawla?
Yeah.
I mean, personally, I think he's getting older now, and his numbers have kind of dropped off a little bit. Yeah, I don't mind that release at all.
Mm-hmm.
I think that CSK are one of the most, from a management perspective, they're quite often held up as the team that franchises around the world should emulate in the way that they pick talent and the way they identify players and so on. I think they've just been incredibly lucky over the history of the IPL that the original mega auction, they ended up with a really good core Indian side, which included like Jadeja and Ashwin and Dhoni. And this was when Jadeja and Ashwin were virtual nobodies. And then they've over the decade following that, despite being banned for 2 years, sort of managed to roll that on. I think we've reached the end game of the initial IPL mega auction way back in 2008. Most of those players are too old now; they can't really contribute. And we're seeing that actually CSK don't have a strategy for overhauling that. I mean, I cannot understand why when you struggled so much for power last year that you'd retained so many overseas players when the market for hitters, it's actually all right. I mean, there are a few guys from overseas that you could bring in to do a bit more, I think, than even like Faf du Plessis. I'm not really sure that's where they need to be allocating resources.
But Jack, this is, I think, ultimately where you're mistaken, because they actually brought back Robin Uthappa, and he's obviously the answer to all of their problems. The guy is an IPL juggernaut. He's got a title win, which is more than you've got. He's got a strike rate of 119, an average of 16 in the IPL 20. So let's dial it down a little bit, mate.
A lot of the best players, Ross.
We might need to clarify that was a joke.
So a lot of the best players, Ross, do have a strike rate above their average. So that is a good stat that he's got. I think it's interesting what he said, Jack, about them being a bit lucky with their initial auction strategy way back when, and building a team around a core of people like Dhoni and Jadeja, and they've sort of gone the inverse now. They've gone full circle, and people are talking about CSK building a team for the future around Sam Curran. It's quite a different situation they found themselves in. Yeah,
I don't think that's a great situation to be in either, to be honest. Particularly if you're going to go back to there's a test match ongoing at the Chepauk stadium, and you can see how much it can spin there. And their IPL strategy over
just a road, mate. Don't know what you mean.
The last 12 years has been to kind of use the natural tendency or the natural bias towards spin to their advantage. I'm not sure really that Sam Curran fits that mold of player. And so if your game plan is to build a team around Sam Curran, why would be my question.
Because that's all they had left, and he was the best player for them last year. That's the only reason people are saying build a team around Sam Curran. It's because they were so awful last year, and he was the only one who stood out as being half decent. That's what it looks like to me.
Is it because he makes things happen?
Oh, he does. Unequivocally, he makes things happen, Dan. I'm sure the statistics bear that out, don't they?
Yeah, well, I have a theory whereby actually players who make things happen, they make things happen because they're good players. And Curran's an interesting one, because I think when he first went to IPL at Kings 11, he was grossly overpriced. But now at CSK, I think he's made perhaps a little bit more realistically priced, and also he has a lot of upside in terms of his hitting. He's really improved his hitting, and I think that again we talk about that kind of rare skill set type of thing. And as a left arm all rounder who can hit, he kind of ticks a lot of boxes there. So I can understand that strategy a bit more. What I can't understand is the strategy of picking 35-year-olds.
Yeah. So
Hey, old people win T20s. We know that now.
No, they don't.
Oh, sorry, no. Unless you're Leicestershire, yeah.
Well,
even the dog disagrees.
Yeah. Well, that was an interesting. I guess you're kind of referring to the Dan Christian quote there, right?
Yes, yeah.
And it was interesting because actually, old guys do win stuff, but it also correlates pretty well with having a high budget and 2 overseas players when no one else had 2 overseas players either. So we'll bear that one in mind too.
Okay, so just to wrap up CSK, so we think they need a bit of a hitter, and that could be the form of anyone that we've kind of mentioned before in terms of Hales, Milan, Finch, or whatever. They could do with another Indian spinner, and you've kind of completely shot down that Shakib is going to be selected. So bring on the bidding war for Glenn Maxwell.
Right then, should we talk about Kings 11? Well, they're not. This has actually surprised me. Punjabi Kings, is that what they're now called? Because all my notes say Kings 11.
Yeah, could even just be Punjab Kings. I'm not even sure they're called Punjabi Kings.
The Kings. Let's go the Kings. The Kings last year, when they were Kings 11, almost pulled off the greatest IPL comeback ever, but they didn't. They blew it over the last weekend. This year, they need to fill 9 spots at the auction, including 5 overseas roles, as they had a reasonable clear out of overseas players. A clear out which included ditching Glenn Maxwell. They will have a 53 crore, so over £5 million pound budget to do this with. My question, Ross, for you is how much of this budget will they spend on Glenn Maxwell?
It was an interesting one, right? Because if you look at all the other teams, we said at the top of the show that when it comes to the holes in each of the teams, Glenn Maxwell, from his reputation and with a bit of confidence, he's probably a good fit for some of these teams. Have Kings 11 just got a bit of a miscalculation and someone's got either accidentally put him on the release list, which could well be a thing in the IPL. I don't know how good their admin might be. Or they're just going, I reckon we get him for a bit cheaper. And I'm not sure that's going to be the case in this one. Have I called that one right, Dan?
Yeah, I think it would be... it's a gamble because they could end up buying him back for more than what they actually released him for. The thing with, again, we talk about that kind of that rare skill set and having that batter who can bowl as well in the top 6 and as a boundary hitter. I know he didn't play well last year.
Yeah, he's a bowler who can bat now, actually.
Well, I think he's gonna attract big bids. He's on my list of guaranteed picks in the auction.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm pretty sure he's not going to go unsold, and I'm pretty sure that he'll go for decent money as well. And yeah, Kings 11 as well. I think they really, really need a lot of pace bowlers. And they really need bowling in general. Their dynamic last year was a strong batting group, but very, very weak bowling. The second worst death economy in the whole comp behind Rajasthan as well. And one player that I think could make an impact for them is actually on their retain list. That's Ishan Perel, who I flagged up in my book as being a real value player. I think he was picked up at 20 crore at the previous auction. 20 lakh, I should say. He was the most expensive player at all.
That is big.
But he didn't get picked. And then he had an amazing side Mushtaq Ali Trophy recently as well. And I think he could really help them in that pace bowling department and probably should have played last year as well. So I think they'll go heavy on pace bowlers. My notes for them is what they need: pace bowlers in general, an elite leg spinner, and spin hitters with the bat. So not too much.
So here's a question for you then, or a few questions. Could they be a destination for someone like Chris Morris or Kyle Jamieson? And if they need a leg spinner, Adil Rashid.
Yes.
Adil Rashid is available. Is he a possible option for the Kings?
Yeah, that's such an interesting one as well, because they talk about Kyle Jamieson or Chris Morris, and a lot of the time their tail started at 7 last year. They had Majib at 7 and stuff, which is, I think that's quite poor planning on their part. So having that bowler who can bat at 7 could well be something that they go for. I think Morris is going to be pretty popular at auction, and Jamieson obviously is a good sort of wild card pick, if you like. as well. Leg spinner, yeah, they need that. There's a couple of others as well, such as Case Ahmed, who might get a bit of interest as well. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how Rashid does in the auction, because I don't think he's ever been picked up before. I don't think he's ever played IPL. A lot of people in England consider him to be the best white ball leg spinner in the world. I'm not sure I quite subscribe to that view. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see if franchises rate him for sure.
I think he has a little bit of the same problem as Joe Root, if Joe Root were to enter the IPL, in that the market, the local market in particular, for leg spinners and for batters who can anchor your innings is quite deep. And if
with
you were going to build, yeah, exactly, well. So if you were going to build a team, you probably wouldn't want to spend much of your budget or use up an overseas player to fill a role that can be filled locally for probably quite a lot less more money, and would also give you the freedom to pick Chris Morris.
Agree with that.
I think from an English point of view, I whether or not you think he's the best white ball leg spinner in the world, I don't, but he is. I think he is up there, and I would love to see Adil Rashid in the IPL, because he's done so well for England in T20 games that aren't geared towards the ball spinning all over the place. I'd love to see it. I'd love to see him in Chennai in 2020. That would be great.
Right, I'm going to draw a line under Kings 11 there, and we'll finish with part one of our auction preview before we take a little break with Kolkata Knight Riders.
Oh, my beautiful, beautiful boys! The guys in purple. They were the most. They were the most disappointing team at the last IPL. I'd say that they were probably the biggest flop in terms of the expectation around their team. They just really didn't deliver. I mean, they brought in Pat Cummins, the most expensive IPL player of all time. They had the MVP in Andre Russell and best captain of all time ever in the universe, Owen Morgan. I mean, if you listen to any other of our other shows, I think the jury is still out on how good Owen Morgan is as a T20 captain. But we can argue about that a different day. I think what they need is probably some quicks in their side, but again, they've not left themselves much room to manoeuvre. They've only got just over 1 billion to operate with at 10.75 crore, and I think they'll probably have to go into the Indian market for that. I can see potentially Umesh Yadav going into there. They probably need another opening batsman. I think at the top of the order, they were quite poor last year. And there's been a lot of loyalty to some pretty average players on that retention list, including their captain who was replaced midway through the season, Dinesh Karthik. Dan, first and foremost from me, Tim Seifert, is he actually any good? Because he was carrying the water bottles and proverbial oranges last time out, and somehow managed to get a place over Tom Banton.
Yeah, I've got notes exactly going along those lines as well. I mean, I said earlier about the fact that you can just pick up so many good overseas at auctions, so there's no point in retaining someone unless they have such a rare skill set, or they're going to be so popular that they're going to be cost more to go buy back at auction. I don't think Seifert ticks any of those boxes, and I'm really surprised at that retention, even at a low price. It just seems to me, and my notes say, a waste of an overseas spot, because I think that realistically it is. He didn't really play last year. I don't foresee him playing again next year, and then yet they released Tom Banton, who I think has much higher upside as a batsman than Seifert. I definitely agree that they need a new opener, and personally I would rip the Narayan script up for them. So I've done some research on them before, and when Narayan opens, they actually have much worse death hitting numbers than when he doesn't open. And I think part of the reasons for that is because they lose early wickets more frequently when he opens, because his balls per dismissal count is pretty low for an opener, one of the lowest you'll find. That their order gets kind of shoved up more, and then they're left more exposed at the death. Mm-hmm. So I would rip that Narayan script up, and I think that they could be another team to look for an overseas opener. Pretty sure one of them won't be Alex Hales though.
Morgan really won't let that go.
That would be a turn up.
So in the pace department, Dan, do you reckon Umesh Yadav could have a spot there, or would they use their one or two of their overseas slots to get maybe Tom Curran into the side. Maybe they'll spend the whole budget on Chris Morris. Maybe even Alzari Joseph or Cottrell from the West India contingent could maybe have a chance.
Yeah, so personally, pace bowler wise, Umesh Yadav is pretty much purely a power play bowler, and I have massive reservations about bowlers who can't bowl multi phases with high expectation. So when I'm looking for bowling recruitment, particularly for domestic overseas in England, for example, I want multi-phase output from those guys, multi-phase positive expectation output, so evidence that they can bowl 2 overs in 2 different phases at a bare minimum. I'm not quite sure that is the case with Umesh Yadav. With regards to overseas bowlers, Cottrell was an interesting one. He kind of fits into that bracket a little bit in terms of not bowling multi-phases, but you might be able to get like 2 or 3 out of him in the power play and then 1 in the middle overs, or occasionally 1 in the early death. And obviously he was bought at a huge price last year, arguably very, very overpriced, and could potentially be bought back a lot cheaper this time. I think his kind of stock's fallen, and you could pick him up maybe at base price would be reasonable. And there's plenty of others. Adam Milne is someone that I've followed for a long period of time. He's had a lot of fitness issues, but I think with IPL having 8 overseas slots as well, there's that potential to if you can get say 2/3 of the season out of Milne, then that would be really positive. He probably won't be able to play every match. We've seen that when he played for Kent before. He hasn't always played every single match.
Right.
But with bench overseas players in the IPL, you have that luxury of picking up someone who maybe can't play game in, game out. So there's a couple of options there. And then the guy that we picked up at Leicestershire, Naveen ul-Haq, as well, is someone who I think could really improve a lot of IPL franchises in terms of multi-phase skills and a lot of good change-ups, action that's quite hard to pick for batters as well. So there's a few names there. Mark Wood might be another one, or maybe someone will go back to Mustafizer as well, who I still think has some ability at this level, but perhaps another player whose stock's fallen a little bit.
I think with KKR, they've kind of got the best IPL side you can imagine from 2016. And because of the sort of high profile of Narine and Russell and Morgan and Cummins, it's a little bit hard to... I think they'll struggle a little bit in terms of those egos to break up their monopoly, if you like, over the 4 spots. I wonder if they'll just pick 2 backups here. I thought Dan Christian to come in as a kind of pound shop Russell, because Andre Russell will miss a couple of matches. Dan Christian kind of does the same thing, not quite as well. And I think they might just look to cover some bases there. I still think they're a little bit old, a bit creaky.
Yeah, I think Liam Livingston, I mean, for Dan, your point earlier around having some people who can bowl a couple of overs, if they're not going to pick Narine, and if his action goes, I mean, he's not got that much confidence at the moment by the sounds of it, could well be another option.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that is KKR rounded up. Let's take a quick break, and then we'll be back with the rest of the playoff teams.
Right, gents, it is the big one. The one we've all been waiting for, Royal Challengers Bangalore. They released, probably about half their squad, I think. So they now have 11 slots with 3 overseas available and a budget of actually, I mean, bearing in mind how much space they've got to fill, of not that much, 35.4 crore, so about £3.5 million. So yeah, a lot of holes to fill. So it's likely to be a fairly busy auction for them. They have brought in Daniel Sams and Harshal Patel from the Capitals already. It'll be interesting to see where they fit. Surely Patel will be a squad player because his record is fairly mediocre, and Daniel Sams hasn't played much in the IPL, so I can't see them going straight in, which means a lot left for them to do. Firstly, are we a little surprised that, given there should be a mega auction just on the horizon, they've decided that now is the time to decimate their entire squad?
It's very RCB, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a real odd one. Well, I mean, who's the brains behind that decision?
I reckon what it could be is Coley lost his temper like he always does and was just like, "You're out, you're out." It was quite on a bad day. Hadn't had much with the baby something.
Baby keeping him up, yeah.
Yeah, and unfortunately, some of the squad players paid the price. Dan, when it comes to their side, surely this is where Steve Smith is going to end up. That would be the most RCB thing, surely.
I hope he doesn't end up there for their sake. Not because I don't rate Steve Smith, but because I think that he needs to be playing in a specific role for a specific team to address that kind of like middle order stability thing. But they already have that. They already have in sheer abundance. Like RCB have my notes for RCB last year: worst boundary percentage in the competition by a mile. Need left-hand batters, of which Steve Smith isn't one. Lack of left and right-hand combos. Coley with the worst boundary percentage in the whole competition of batters who faced 150 plus balls, over 4% worse than the next worst player. Just 6.5% boundaries as a squad against spinners. Massive middle order, middle over struggles. Need better spin hitters to go alongside Felipe, who's an excellent player of spin. I don't think Steve Smith ticks those boxes for me.
And for that reason, he will be featuring as RCB's number 3.
When it comes to defying logic, there's only one team that does it as well as anyone, and that is RCB. I mean, you've highlighted a lot of the problems they've got there, but I think looking at what they've still got, they've actually got quite a good core of their team. I mean, they've got some good young Indian talent in players like Saini and Siraj and Washington Sundar. They've got Kohli, who has his role of not scoring boundaries, but he'll hold the innings together if you've got people around him who can score. People like Padikal, De Villiers, Adam Zampa, who's shown to be pretty handy when it comes to T20 cricket against all odds, and Chahal as well, who's not bad. So there's 8 players there who are all pretty good. So that, I mean, for one, makes it a little more surprising that they've decided to cut it all up now and try and redo it with a limited pool. But I suppose with the fact that they've got so much to replace, we need to look at the key areas that they need to sort out. So, I mean, in terms of who they've got rid of, they've got rid of Finch, they've got rid of Dale Steyn, and they've got rid of Chris Morris and Moeen Ali. So I would say that leaves them with needing a batsman who can hit the ball a long way, an elite pacer, and then another all-rounder. If we start with the all-rounders, surely this is another case of trying to release Chris Morris to get Chris Morris back cheaper. That may well backfire because he was quite expensive and he was injured a fair amount, but he's a really, really good player to have in your team, isn't he?
They wanted Stark. I thought it was really obvious that they made a play to free up the budget to get Mitchell Stark. Australia changed their travel advice to their players, said that they might not. The Cricket Australia said they might not grant exemptions. So I think following that, Stark decided he couldn't really be bothered with the IPL. Now he's not going, and their squad's a mess because of that.
Well, that answers my later question, so that's good.
The thing is, with the amount of players they've released, obviously they've released a lot of players, but most of them, apart from probably Morris, you'd say, arguably Dube, are fringe players. So maybe they kind of purposely decided to have that cull of fringe players to free up a load of budget to then really go for like quite a tight, high quality squad. That's probably what I would do in their situation. Morris, maybe they're going to buy him back. I don't know. They're trying to buy him back for cheaper, but I think if that's what their plan was, I think it could be disastrous because of that rare skill set argument. Yeah. All-rounder who's a pace hitter at the death and a death bowler is like premium in terms of rarity. So that's a difficult one. So
could they go in for someone like Carl Jamieson, who's probably more towards the bowling end, but we know he can hold a bat?
Yeah, they could do that, or maybe even look at a sort of a batting all-rounder like Ben Cutting or Lewis Gregory or someone like that as well, who's kind of fits that mould a little bit. Or Richardson as well is another one who can certainly hold a bat 7 or 8. Would be a good lower order hitter. He's got an excellent death over strike rate with the bat. So yeah,
Dan,
yeah.
when it comes to the right-hand bowler, left-hand fast bowler, is there a benefit in the IPL? Should Sheldon Cottrell be valued more than kind of Zari Joseph, for example? Thinking they're about like for like.
Well, I probably would rate Cottrell better than Joseph anyway, but regardless of what arm they bowl out of. But yeah, what I find in the IPL is that a lot of the time, the teams attach what I call a left arm premium to players, in that they'll pay more for a left arm of the same quality as an equivalent right arm.
Yeah.
Personally, I don't think that makes sense. I've gone through an absolute ton of historical data to look at what successful teams, what their squad makeup is, and I'm unconvinced that a left armer is a particular driver of success. There's certainly been a number of teams without a core left armer in there, a pace left armer in their group, who have done very, very well in franchise T20.
Yeah.
So personally, I certainly wouldn't want to overpay for a left armer, but teams often differ from that point of view.
So what about the batting side of things then? Because Aaron Finch played quite a lot last year and didn't really do himself justice, and certainly didn't play to the levels that we know he can play at. Do we think so? I mean, yeah, there's a lot they need to cover, and batting is obviously one of them. So, I mean, are we looking at the same names that we've been talking about already? People like, I mean, it's probably an opener they need, or somewhere up the top of the order. So are we looking at Alex Hales again, or maybe a left field move for someone like Martin Guptill?
The problem is that their batting lineup is so inflexible. So we've got a situation where probably they're going to go with the top four, and this is going to be a pretty rigid top four without much deviation, unless there's injuries or a real, lack of output from a player, of Padikkal, Philippi, and then Kohli and de Villiers. And the Philippi, I would actually bat at 3 or 4, because he's a superb player of spin. His strike rate against spin is actually higher than it is against pace, which is extremely rare dynamic. And I think he's better. Ultimately, he'll be a better player at, say, a 3 or 4 player middle overs than opening the batting. Padikkal is a future superstar in my view. So they kind of got that base covered. But I agree that they definitely need a squad opener for sure. Parthy Patel used to play that role, and he's now retired. So they definitely need a squad opener from somewhere, I think, yeah.
Definitely not going to be Martin Guptill, surely. It's not going to be him.
I personally would have others ahead of him, yeah.
I mean, the thing is, when it comes to RCB, you look at the list of names that they should pick, and then you cross them off, and look at some people who are sort of in the category below that you think may end up there. But
is there Max, do you reckon there's an ego thing as well? Like, being in a team when you've got the messiah that is AB de Villiers and Virat Kohli, you've got to have a pretty kind of robust sense of self-worth to kind of even fit into that crowd. Is there, who on that list has that, do you reckon? Jason Roy?
Yeah, Jason Roy's probably got it. But again, I mean, that's quite a big name to have as a squad opener, isn't it?
Yeah, but he's not got the best T20 record, has he? And I remember when Dan, you came on the show before, and you said that actually Jason Roy does leave a little bit out there on the field.
Yeah, no, I agree. I would have others ahead of him too. I wonder, like I said, I think they need left-handers. I personally, I wouldn't have released Moeen Ali, and I think that he would have been perfect for them because he's so flexible. He can play opener, middle order, excellent player of spin, offers a bowling option for matchups in the top 6, and he had a low price as well. I think that was an absurd release, to be honest with you. And they needed left-handers as well. One player that might fit that bill is Evan Lewis as an opener, as a left-handed opener who had a solid T10 recently, played for Mumbai previously in the IPL, probably won't cost the earth, and I think that he could be a really good squad opener as well for them.
I think, I mean, it's a good point with RCB. What I'm getting sort of the theme of this conversation is kind of, as Jack alluded to with a potential Stark play, they fucked it really. They've got rid of their entire squad, and it's all gone to pot, and now they need to replace them all, and they don't really know what to do, because we don't. Well, I mean, if we can't quite come together with a strategy for them, And bearing in mind what we've seen from them in the past, I'm not sure they can come together with a strategy either. So I'm really interested to see what RCB end up with.
Well, I think Dan's points. Dan listed off like a bunch of stats or that basically illustrate that RCB's problem is not necessarily about playing personnel. They go about T20 in a kind of odd way with their plethora of right-handers and their inability to score quickly in the middle overs because they don't hit any boundaries.
We see that, don't we? In games with RCB, if 160 is a good score, they've got the game in the bag.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think maybe we were talking with you, Dan. We were saying that Virat Kohli isn't the best T20 player in the world, but when the chase is 160, Virat Kohli is the best T20 player in the world. That's what I think they need to look at, though, is that I don't think that you can have Kohli and de Villiers knocking the ball around for 10 overs in the middle of every single one of your matches. Until that stops happening, a lot of these questions about who could they bring in as an opener, or was releasing Chris Morris stupid, or where could Moeen Ali bat, are secondary. They're just strategically not playing the game very effectively.
And the fact that they're paying Kohli 17 crore to do that as well.
So rather than bin 11 players to get rid of, to save that money, you could have binned 2, and they might have been in a better spot.
Yeah. Shall we
next time
move on to Sunrisers Hyderabad?
Let's. Yes. So Sunrisers Hyderabad, who started off last season looking like they were going to be finishing bottom, ended up usurping RCB to make it into the eliminator match, and ultimately fell short of making the final. But ultimately a pretty good performance in the end, and it was kind of symptomatic of how their squad's been, and I think we've spoken about it before. They've got these 4 overseas stars in Warner, Bairstow, Williamson and Rashid Khan, and if you play them all, then you're left with a really unbalanced team, particularly in the middle order where the batting sort of tails off quite rapidly, and in the bowling department. What I've seen from, I think their retentions is kind of an interesting one this year, because they've kept Mitchell Marsh, who got injured in the first game of the IPL last year and didn't play, and Jason Holder, who they brought in to replace Mitchell Marsh because he got injured at the start of the IPL, which suggests to me that maybe they have identified this as a problem. Not that they've necessarily gone the right way about fixing it, but do you think that... So, I mean, initially I thought maybe what they want to do is bring in, like you said, you don't rate him hugely, but I thought that Shivam Dube could be ideal for them because he's okay at both batting and bowling and Indian, so it allows them to play those 3 top-class batsmen and have a little bit more balance to their team. But with their retentions, I'm thinking maybe that's not the route they would go down. Does that seem like a fair assessment, or am I talking absolute codswallop?
From my perspective, they haven't got a big budget in what they've got left to spend at auction. So I think they're going to be making kind of minor bargain type adjustments to their squad. I actually probably would have cashed in on Marsh. He's a very good pace hitter, but struggles against spin from a strike rate perspective from the numbers I have. And I would also probably have cashed in on someone like Shahbaz Nadeem for another just over 3 crore as well, just try and boost that pot up a bit. I think you can probably have bought him back cheaper at auction, and possibly you could even have bought Manish Pandey cheaper at auction than 11 crore as well. So that would have been a little bit of a different strategy. But yeah, I think that a lot of the teams are very risk averse in terms of looking to try and buy back players cheaper at auction. They're not really playing it from like a game theory perspective on the thing.
Potentially as well with a mega auction coming up, it doesn't seem like, maybe this year could be a bit of a go through the motions kind of thing and wait until then to make the big changes.
Yeah. Well, I think with Sunrisers, they really need boundary hitters. They're very mediocre very mediocre depth batting strike rate, the worst in the comp, and that's something that there's been a dynamic of them over the last few years. Even with the change of management, that's still been the case. The mediocre boundary hitting numbers in general, and for the kind of you talked earlier about RCB having that dynamic where it's almost like designed to be like that. And I think that to some extent that was also the case with Sunrisers. We kind of, for the first half of the comp in particular, we saw responsible Warner, if you like of prioritising dot ball avoidance rather than hitting boundaries. And that's generally a pretty bad strategy in T20 from the research that I've done anyway. They need a death hitter to go with Abdul Samad. I think Abdul Samad is someone who I think has really high potential in that role. They have Rashid Khan as well. They need one more. I don't think Holder is really a death hitter. And whether he gets in as an overseas over the other guys is another matter as well.
Yeah, I think given the makeup of
Max.
I'll say given the makeup of the squad, it would have to be an Indian player, right?
Well, Priyam Garg had one game where he did it last year.
I'm pretty sure from memory his boundary percentages is not great though.
Okay, well,
he
one off then.
I think they were pinning. It looked like they were pinning a lot of hopes on Priyam Garg last year, and he really did not come to the fore. So, are there any? Are you aware of any sort of or the young or perhaps forgotten Indian talent that could come in and do the job? I saw that Mohammad Azruddin scored a 37-ball century for Kerala last month. Could he be an option?
Yeah, the thing is, like I said, it's so difficult because there's that recency bias at a lower level comp. It's so tempting, I think, for franchises to go down that road of picking players who have done well very recently and then paying over the odds for them. And Sunrisers, they don't have that luxury in terms of their budget as well. I think they should have played Virat Singh last year as well. He's got a bit of strike rate upside. He's more of like a 130 strike rate type player, but he's a player that I think has very high potential. They bought him and then didn't use him. There's some hitters at lower level, but whether they're quite good enough to do that at a higher level is another matter entirely. Hitan Dalal I don't think even made the final auction list, and he's someone that I think could have done well in that role. Vivek Singh is another. There's a couple at the lower levels who you could probably say, okay, well, I'll pay 20 lakh for them or something like that and have a little punt on them and see if they've got upside. But yeah, domestic market I think is extremely tricky in this mini auction, especially we haven't had a big sample size of data. No Tamil Nadu Kanaka to Premier League recently or anything like that. So no. Not much to go on, really.
Do you think there might be a bit of a recency bias with the Big Bash as well, with that having just happened?
We
might be seeing some very well-paid Aussies shortly.
Yeah, I mean, that tends to happen at most auctions anyway. So, yeah, I don't think this year will be that much different.
Should we move on to the big two?
Yes, I think so. I think Sunrisers, probably not much going to happen there, and going to be probably a sad tournament for Sunrisers. But
not going to predict another title.
I'm not going to be predicting them winning it this year. No, which probably means they'll win it. Delhi Capitals,
the team that came second.
Yeah, so second place Delhi Capitals. They again don't have a huge budget to play with. They've got 13.4 crore, but they do have quite a few slots to fill and 3 overseas slots. So I might be some wheeler dealing on some of the cheaper options for them if they make many moves. I suppose the big question for Delhi Capitals, having finished runners-up to Mumbai Indians and having a good tournament, but ultimately always being not quite as good as Mumbai Indians, is what do they need to do to be better than Mumbai Indians? And can they do it now?
I don't think they can do it with 9 crore. So they've released a few overseas players, so they're going to be having to pick up budget overseas players to fill those gaps. Personally, I would have cashed in on Hetmeyer at almost 8 crore. I think he's underwhelmed based on expectations and reputation. And I think that you could either buy him back cheaper at auction or buy an equivalent level player for less. So that's another way they could have freed up some money. For the notes that I have for them is they need a high quality pace bowler, an opening batsman, and a lower order hitter or all-rounder. They're the 3 key areas for me.
Yeah.
Do you not think that they're sort of covered with Rabada and Norkia in the pace bowling department?
Yeah, but then what happens if they get injured and there's a South Africa tour at the end of the tournament as well?
Okay, well there we go.
Step up Chris Wokes and Daniel Sams. Oh no,
Yeah,
Sams is gone.
No,
isn't he?
Sams is gone,
Sam's
mate. They've got rid of
Sam's
him.
gone.
Yeah, he's off to RCB to. Don't know.
He looked pretty average when he played, I must admit.
I thought Hales or Dawid Malan might end up at the Capitals, because I don't think either of them will go for big money, but they probably be kind of useful for Delhi.
So yeah, I think we mentioned
at some point.
before, haven't we, that where they often fall down, and particularly in the games against the game against Mumbai Indians in the final, we saw that it's firepower where they ended up falling down. They were opening with Stoinis and sort of banking on him scoring runs at the top of the order, and perhaps maybe a better way would be to get a classic T20 opener and put Stoinis down the order where he could finish games. And to be honest, if Rishabh Pant plays like he does in the Test matches, then they've got a finisher already. Because I mean, last year he scored at a strike rate of 110, which is down from, I think it was 160 the year before, and like having that in your middle order really takes out a big chunk of that. So it's possible that they could fix those problems without having to do much at all. And I think one of the other things they might want to do is, when they've got rid of Alex Carey, so they might be looking to pick up a wicket keeper as a backup for Rishabh Pant, maybe Sam Billings or Kusal Pereira or something like that.
I thought they were going to go Indian for this, and I wrote down the name of the guy. I think it's Bharat.
KS Bharat,
yeah, who's floating around in the pool.
But they've got the overseas slots, so that's the. I suppose if you're replacing Pant, it makes.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
With a wicketkeeper batsman, if they're going to go overseas, go like for like with Carey. Here's a few names that I've noted down that could help with them. Sam Billings was one that's already been mentioned, and a couple of others as well. Gurbaz again as an opener keeper, who's someone who ticks that box. Definitely, in my view, a young player with massive upside, I think. And Josh Inglis as well as another guy who had a very good big bash in Australia, and could do a good job for them, I think, long term as well. And I think Hales is a good fit for them as well. The problem is, I actually disagree with what Max said about them. I think about Hales not going for a lot of money. I think with the recency bias of the big bash, he could be one of the hottest properties at the auction. I wouldn't be surprised if he's out of Delhi's reach price-wise.
Yeah, or maybe they could go for James Vince.
Right.
One final thought on the Delhi Capitals. You mentioned they could do with another pace bowler, and they don't have much money, so perhaps they could be the ones to take a punt on Arjun Tendulkar, son of Sachin. Someone's going to do it, right? Just because of the name, it will happen.
Right then, Mumbai Indians, the final team, the winners of the 2020 IPL and probably the favourites of the 2021 iteration of the tournament. Sort of similarly to Delhi, I think this tournament will be, or this auction will be, about refinement for Mumbai Indians. They've got 15 crores, so 1.5 million to fill 7 spots, including 4 overseas players. Based on who they've released, I think it's a virtual certainty that their priority will be to pick up a fast bowler. And if that fast bowler can bowl at the death, even better. I do think that they might be limited a little bit in terms of who they can go for, because 1.5 million to fill 7 spots isn't loads of money. Max, are there any lower profile names that you think they might look at in this area?
To be honest, if I were Mumbai Indians, I just wouldn't bother, because it's just like, why upset the apple cart? I mean, that.
So hold on, your tip is to play with a squad of 18 because you're already so good.
Yeah, like why not just stick with the same 18 and try and make it a little bit more of a competition for everyone else, because otherwise it's just going to be boring and they're going to win again.
Right, Dan, a serious answer on that. You've got 1.5 million to spend. You need to fill 7 spots. 4 of them are overseas players. You've got rid of a couple or 2 or 3 fast bowlers. Who's top of your list that you think you could reasonably attain?
I think if Mumbai Indians get Jai Richardson, they're going to be really hard to beat, because for several reasons. First of all, they have, with like I said, Pattinson and Bolt, who played quite a lot for them last year, they have strong power play bowlers, but bowlers who probably aren't above average at the death. So finding that
super overs.
So finding that 2 and 2 type bowler is key, and I think in Richardson that's someone who ticks that box. And also in their side in particular, he can slot in at 8 and add that extra death hitting impetus as well. And they've got a team full of hitters, and I think having that extra firepower at 8 just is really nice in terms of their balance. It enables the higher order batters to attack a lot more, knowing that they've got a little bit more backup down the order. So for me, he would be the person that I would target for Mumbai Indians specifically, but also by the same token, if I'm working for one of the other franchises, I'm going to be doing my best to stop them getting a player like that, because I think he's really useful for what they need and has the quality to improve their group as well. Obviously, we've seen that they've released like 4 pace bowlers, so we can assume that they're going to look for backup as well. I'd probably spend about half their budget on Jai Richardson if I had the choice, and then look to pick up some budget options, of which there will be plenty at auction.
I've got Jason Behrendorff down as a potential pick for Mumbai Indians.
It's quite like for like as that power play bowler, though. That's the problem.
That's what I don't, as a backup, not as someone to come in. But if you've got Southey and Southey drops out of form, because Southey's not always been brilliant in the IPL. So if you want someone else, I thought Behrendorff might be a good one.
Adam Milne could be good for them at a low price as well. Backup, squad player, very good at impact when he comes in.
Could we see the making of Tom Curran in a Mumbai Indians shirt?
Personally, I don't think they'll go for him, and I kind of have reservations over his death bowling numbers right now as well.
There we are. I'm not sure there's really that much more to say about Mumbai Indians, so we might as well not say anything. They're really good. I'm sure that whatever they do on the 18th, they'll be there or thereabouts. But I think you can be almost certain that they'll follow that Pacers.
Is there not a spin problem there? Well, not a problem
really,
per se. Could they be better in the spin department, Mumbai Indians?
Who have they got? So they've got
Rahul Chahar, pretty good.
Chahar. They've got Krunal, who can bowl some overs, and they have got someone else as well. But the name.
Who was the guy they played in the final? Who came in? Yeah. So he that was great. That must have been a matchup specialist. That would have.
Yeah.
They might not be the best spin team in the tournament, but this is one of the reasons why Adil Rashid probably won't get a contract or might not get a contract, is that let's say Mumbai Indians are a bang average from the perspective of spin. They've still got some good spinners. Jahar's still a really good spinner, even though he might not be in the top 10 spinners he probably is in the top 10, but might not be in the top 5 spinners. There's still spin options there. I don't think they'll be absolutely desperate to find someone else.
Maybe someone like Fabian Allen could do a good job for them at a low price as well, as a hitter who bowls a bit of spin for matchups as well. It kind of goes along with their dynamic quite well, I think, in their squad dynamic. I think he would maybe be a good backup option for them.
Right. So I think that's all the team's done. There are a few players that I think we should speculate on where they land. What are we up to? We're up to over an hour now, so we should be reasonably quick on this. Do we think David Malan will get a contract, and where do we think he'll end up? Anyone?
I'd like
he'll get a contract.
So he'll get a contract. Which team?
Based on what they don't need, I would say RCB, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't think he fits the Mumbai template. I don't think he fits the KKR template. CSK, I could see him at, actually.
Great. Glenn Maxwell, will he be going back to Kings 11 Punjab, or put the Kings, or will he end up somewhere else?
I think he'll go. I think he'll go somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
I reckon.
Don't be shy about where.
Well, I reckon they won't be able to save. I reckon they won't be able to do it. Do you reckon they'll be able to swallow their pride and then pay? If he goes for more, they can't go for him, because that is just admitting that it's complete failure on their behalf. I think I could see him in a CSK shirt, but
what about KKR and tearing up, as you said, tearing up the Sunil Narain?
I don't think they've got enough money, have they? This is the problem with that. If you're playing Dream Team, it might work, but I think they've got the lowest budget.
Well, you never know. We could see some trades, some funky trades.
There are a few more interesting players on here that we haven't really found a position for. Steve Smith, do you reckon he'll get a gig anywhere, Dan?
He'll get a contract, I think. I think he'll be actually reasonably popular at auction, although personally he's not a player that I would spend a lot of money on.
Matt, can you? Is there a gambling market for this? Because if there is, I'm going to put money on him going to RCB. Because
if there is, it's also probably rigged.
And his captain, Aaron Finch. Max, surely someone will pick up Aaron Finch.
You know what? I just think he's getting on a little bit, and he's didn't have a good time last year. There's a few other people popping up. He might miss out, you know.
Ooh, I think that'd be reasonably controversial.
I agree with Max as well, by the way, on that. I think that
hasn't he played for like 6 of the 8 teams as well?
yeah, he's going to go for the full start.
Yeah, completely. IPL completely.
And then
mate.
finally, I think Max and I speculated that he might go for like 500 grand or something like that. Shivam Dube, how rich do you reckon he'll be this time next week, Dan?
Yeah, well, personally, if I was making a decision, he wouldn't be that rich. But I agree.
Fortunately for him, you're not.
Exactly. Fortunately for him, no IPL team wanted me. Yeah, I think he'll probably be one of those kind of popular players, just primarily because those type of all-rounders are quite rare. And the domestic market tends to be quite overpriced in these mini auctions generally as well. So I can see that happening for sure.
One player who won't be getting a gig is Sreesanth. Unfortunately, no teams expressed any interest in bidding for him, so he didn't make the final shortlist. There was a franchise official who gave a quote anonymously on this. Maybe Sreesanth did not attract franchises for some reason. I wonder what that reason could be.
It's because allegedly he's a shit bloke.
And finally, to end on a down note, I suppose, Sterling and Kurtzer didn't make the list, which I thought was a little bit of a snub to some of the smaller nations, because they, I think, offer a reasonable amount of upside, probably at a fairly budget price as well. Fellas, does anyone have anything else on the IPL auction before we wrap up the show?
Did you say that Marnus Labuschagne is in the auction list?
He is.
Yeah.
Is he going to go anywhere? Because I mean, didn't he play he played in a T20 game against was it Australia A when they had the inter club one in the warm up against when they were back in England, and he hit what was it 50? He put plenty of sixes, so he's still definitely got the talent.
Well, he was a leg spinner in the Big Bash, wasn't he?
Yeah, so I'm kind of sure. Is there an opportunity there, Dan, or is that just going to be another pipe dream for?
My perception versus what might happen is two different things. Personally, I feel that there's batters with far more upside than him. What will probably happen is that he'll get like a 2-crore contract or something like that. Yeah, I mean, we've said earlier about like the track record of Australian players doing very well financially and being picked in this tournament, and maybe that's to a lesser extent these days, but it's still some extent. And yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if he got picked up. Although, like I said, I think there's only 22 overseas slots available. I think there's some better options out there.
Well, I think we should end it there because we have gone over an hour now. So that's the IPL auction. We will reconvene next week to go over who had a good auction and who had a dreadful auction, because there'll be a team. There'll be a team out there, won't there, who have recruited a bunch of farmers. Well, anyway, that's it. Thanks for joining us, Dan. Have a good one.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Appreciate that. See you soon.